The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from 100 different worlds. Lights floated in the air like tiny suns. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top. Representatives from every major species sat in their assigned places. Watching the small human woman who stood alone at the center of the chamber, Nari, Shin kept her back straight and her voice steady. She had practiced this speech 1,000 times. Every word mattered. Every pause had meaning. She was not just speaking for herself. She was speaking for 10 billion humans who had waited 120 years for this moment. "We ask only for what every other species in this council already has," she said. "Equal voting rights, access to the same technologies, the freedom to grow and develop without restrictions." She paused and looked around the chamber. "We have followed your rules. We have obeyed your laws. We have done everything you asked of us. And still, you treat us like children who cannot be trusted." High Counselor Velen sat on his elevated throne at the far end of the hall. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and eyes that held no warmth. He had led the council for 300 years, and in all that time, he had never once voted in favor of humanity. "Your petition has been heard," Velen said. His voice echoed through the chamber, like the sound of stones falling into deep water. "The council will now vote." Nari watched as the representatives entered their decisions. One by one, the votes appeared on the massive display above the chamber. Read for no. Green for yes. The screen filled with red. Not a single green light appeared. Ambassador Torek of the Mordani Empire stood up from his seat. He was a large creature, covered in thick purple scales. His species had always been the loudest voice against human advancement. "Perhaps now the humans will finally understand," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "You are young. You are dangerous. You cannot control your own violent nature. The galaxy is better served by keeping you contained."
After rippled through the chamber.
Other representatives joined in, making jokes about human weakness and human foolishness. Nari stood in the center of it all, her face showing nothing. But inside, something cold and hard was forming in her chest. She bowed once to the council, turned, and walked out of the chamber without another word, 12,000 light-years away. President Hannah Yoon watched the broadcast in her private office on Earth. The room was dark, except for the glow of the screen. She sat perfectly still as she listened to the alien laughter. Beside her stood Admiral Jinho Park, the commander of Earth's entire military force. Jinho was 63 years old. He had spent his whole life serving humanity, and his whole life watching his people be humiliated. His hands were clasped behind his back, but they were shaking with barely controlled anger. The broadcast ended. Silence filled the room. "They will never change," Hannah said quietly. "We could wait another 100 years, and they would still see us as lesser beings." Jinho nodded slowly. "I know." Hannah stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city of New Souls spread out beneath her, lights glittering like earthbound stars. 800 million people lived in this city alone. All of them were watching. All of them were waiting. "Begin Protocol Exodus," she said. Jinho felt his heart skip. He had helped design Protocol Exodus 15 years ago, during a dark night when he had finally admitted to himself that peace might never be possible. He had hoped it would never be needed. "Are you certain?" he asked. Hannah turned to face him. Her eyes were dry, but there was a fire burning behind them that he had never seen before. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Within the hour, a signal went out across the galaxy. It traveled through hidden channels that alien governments did not even know existed. Every human diplomat, every trader, every scientist working on distant worlds received the same message. The words were simple: "Come home." You have 72 hours. No explanation was given. None was needed. Every human in the galaxy knew what those words meant. They had been preparing for this possibility for generations. Ships began to move. Human freighters changed course. Human workers resigned from their positions without warning. Human families packed their belongings and headed for the nearest transport hub. The aliens watched in confusion as thousands of humans suddenly abandoned their lives and fled toward Earth space. Ambassador Torek noticed the exodus first. He reported it to the council, but no one took it seriously. "Let them run home and sulk," he said. "They will come crawling back eventually. They always do." 3 days later, every human in the galaxy had returned to Earth space. And then the borders closed. The message arrived at the Galactic Council at exactly midnight, Galactic Standard Time. It appeared on every screen in the Great Hall simultaneously. High Counselor Velen was pulled from his sleep to read it. The message was short. There was no greeting, no formality, no diplomatic language. Just cold, simple words. The United Earth Federation hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council. All treaties between humanity and council species are void. All borders are closed. Any vessel entering human space will be destroyed without warning. This decision is final. Velen stared at the screen for a long time. He did not understand what he was reading. No species had ever left the council before. No species had ever dared. "They cannot be serious," he said to his advisors. "This is a bluff, a negotiating tactic." But Elder Yura of the Lumari was not so sure. She was ancient beyond measure, old enough to remember when humans first made contact with the galaxy. She had watched them carefully over the years. She had studied their history, their wars, their capacity for both creation and destruction. "You do not understand them," she said quietly. "None of you ever have. Humans do not make threats they do not intend to keep." Velen waved his hand dismissively. "Then they will sit in their little corner of the galaxy and pout. Eventually, they will realize they cannot survive without us." Yura said nothing. But she knew in her ancient heart that something terrible had been set in motion. The galaxy had pushed humanity too far for too long. And now, for the first time in their history, humans were no longer asking for acceptance. They were preparing for war, in the orbital shipyards above Earth. Admiral Jinho Park walked through corridors filled with activity. Workers rushed past him, carrying equipment and shouting orders. The sound of welding filled the air. Sparks rained down, like orange snow. He stopped at a viewing window and looked out at the massive shape taking form in the construction bay. It was a ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first of many. "How long?" President Yoon asked through his earpiece. 6 months for the first wave," Jinho replied. 1 year for the full fleet. Make it faster." Jinho smiled grimly. "Yes, Madam President." He turned away from the window and continued walking. There was much work to be done. Humanity had been patient for 120 years. That patience had finally run out. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humans could really do. 6 months had passed since humanity closed its borders. 6 months of silence. 6 months of waiting, and the galaxy was beginning to grow afraid. At first, the Galactic Council treated the situation as a minor problem. Ambassador Torek made jokes about humans hiding in their caves. Other representatives laughed and returned to their normal business. They assumed that Earth would eventually come back, apologize, and accept whatever terms the Council offered. But the silence continued, and then the ships started disappearing. The first vessel to vanish was a Mordani freighter. It had ignored the warnings and crossed into human space, hoping to take a shorter route to its destination. The ship sent one final transmission before all contact was lost. The captain's voice was filled with panic. "There's something out there. Something huge." It's then nothing. Search teams were sent. They found no wreckage, no bodies, no sign that the ship had ever existed. Over the next 3 months, 16 more ships disappeared. Some were traders. Some were explorers. 2 were military vessels sent by General Keth of the Helix Collective to investigate. None of them returned. None of them were ever found. Fear began to spread through the galaxy like a disease. Trade routes that passed near human space were abandoned. Shipping companies refused to send their vessels anywhere close to Earth's borders. The galactic economy began to suffer. High Counselor Velen called an emergency meeting. "We must discover what the humans are doing," he announced. "I am authorizing a full military reconnaissance of human space." General Keth stood up eagerly. He was a warrior by nature, and he had been waiting for an excuse to test humanity's defenses. "Give me 50 ships," he said. "I will bring you answers within a week." The fleet was assembled and sent toward human space. Keth watched from his command vessel as they crossed the border. He expected to encounter human patrols. He expected warnings, threats, perhaps a brief skirmish. Instead, there was only darkness and silence. His sensors detected nothing. His communications received no response. It was as if his entire fleet had sailed into empty space. Then, without warning, every light on every ship went dark. Power systems failed. Weapons went offline. Life support began to shut down. Keth's final transmission reached the Council 3 hours later. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "They were waiting for us. They knew we were coming. Tell the Council. Tell them we were wrong, Ebb." Out humans. The fleet was never seen again. On Earth, the work continued without rest. Dr. Sorabik had not slept in 4 days. She stood in her laboratory, surrounded by holographic displays showing data that would have been impossible just 1 year ago. For over a century, the Galactic Council had restricted human technology. They had banned research into advanced weapons, faster-than-light travel, and dozens of other fields. They claimed it was for the safety of the galaxy. Now those restrictions were gone, and human scientists were making discoveries at a speed that shocked even themselves. Sora touched a display, and a three-dimensional image of a new weapon system appeared. "Quantum disruption field," she said to the officers gathered behind her. "Once activated, it creates a bubble around an entire star system. Nothing inside that bubble can use faster-than-light travel. Ships are trapped. Fleets are immobilized. Escape becomes impossible." Admiral Jinho Park studied the image carefully. "How long until it is ready?" 6 months? Make it 3. Sora nodded. She did not complain. She did not explain why 3 months was nearly impossible. She simply went back to work. Every human on Earth understood what was at stake. Personal comfort meant nothing. Sleep meant nothing. Only results mattered, in the military training centers scattered across Earth's surface. General Tai-Ho Kim was building an army. He walked through rows of soldiers standing at attention. They were young, most of them. Children of a generation that had grown up hearing stories about alien contempt. They had been raised on tales of human diplomats being laughed at, human petitions being rejected, human dreams being crushed. Now they were being forged into weapons. "You are not peacekeepers," Tai-Ho told them, his voice carrying across the training field. "You are not defenders. You are the fury of a people who have been pushed to their limit. When the time comes, you will show the galaxy what happens when humanity stops asking and starts taking." The soldiers did not cheer. They did not shout. They simply nodded, their eyes burning with quiet determination. President Hannah Yoon addressed the people of Earth. On the anniversary of their withdrawal from the Council, her speech was broadcast to every home, every ship, every station in human space. "1 year ago, we left a table where we were never welcome," she said. "1 year ago, we decided that we would no longer beg for scraps from those who saw us as lesser beings. Today, I can tell you that our choice was the right one." Behind her, images appeared, showing the new fleet. Ships that were larger, faster, and more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Weapons that could crack planets. Engines that could cross the galaxy in days instead of weeks. "They thought we would crawl back," Hannah continued. "They thought we would apologize and accept their terms. They were wrong. We have spent a century learning from them, studying them, understanding their weaknesses. Now we will use that knowledge." She paused, her eyes hard and cold. "The galaxy made us into what we are. Now they will face what they created." Deep in space, near the border of human territory, a small ship drifted in the darkness. Inside was Elder Yira, alone. She had come without the Council's permission. She needed to understand what was happening. She needed to see for herself what the humans were planning. Her sensors detected something moving at the edge of her range. Something massive. She adjusted her course and moved closer, her old heart beating faster with every passing minute. When she finally saw it, she forgot how to breathe. It was a ship. But the word ship did not do it justice. It was a monster of metal and fire, stretching across the void like a sleeping god. Its hull was covered with weapons she could not identify. Its engines burned with a light that hurt to look at, and it was not alone. Behind it, stretching back into the infinite darkness, were more ships. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. A fleet so vast that it defied comprehension. Yera's hands trembled as she reached for her communication system. Before she could send a message, a voice crackled through her speakers. It was cold and emotionless. "We know you were there, Elder. We allowed you to come this close so you could see. Go back to your council. Tell them what you witnessed. Tell them the silence is almost over." Yera could barely speak. What are you going to do?" There was a long pause. Then the voice answered, "We are going to show the galaxy that humanity was never weak. We were just waiting." The massive ship turned slowly, its weapons tracking her vessel for a moment before going still. A final message came through her speakers. "Run home, Elder. Run home and pray. The storm is coming." Yera turned her ship and fled as fast as her engines could carry her. Behind her, the human fleet waited in the darkness, patient, ready, hungry. The silence was about to end. And when it did, the galaxy would never be the same. Elder Yera stood before the full Galactic Council, her ancient body trembling. She had lived for 800 years. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had witnessed wars that burned across entire star systems. But she had never been as afraid as she was in this moment. "I saw them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thousands of ships, weapons unlike anything in our records. They let me go so I could deliver this message to you." The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted questions. Some demanded details. Others called her a liar. Ambassador Torek rose from his seat, his purple scales flushing with anger. "This is impossible," he declared. "The humans had nothing a year ago. They could not have built such a fleet in so short a time, yet they have," Yera replied. "I saw it with my own eyes. We restricted their technology for a century. We never imagined what they might accomplish without those chains." High Counselor Velen raised his hand for silence. The chamber slowly quieted. His face was troubled, but he refused to show fear. "If what you say is true, then we must respond. We cannot allow a rogue species to threaten the peace of the galaxy." Commander Brel stepped forward. He was the highest-ranking military officer in the Council's combined forces. He had won battles against a dozen different enemies over his long career. "Send me," he said. "Give me a diplomatic ship and a message of peace. If there is any chance to avoid war, I will find it." Velen considered for a moment, then nodded. "Take representatives from every major species. Show the humans that we are united. Offer them everything they originally asked for." Torek sputtered in protest. "You cannot be serious. After everything they have done, after the ships they destroyed?" "Those ships violated their borders after being warned," Brel said coldly. "We have no one to blame but ourselves. If giving them what they wanted a year ago can prevent a war now, then we must try." The diplomatic mission was assembled within days. Ships from 12 different species formed a convoy, all flying under the white flag of peace. Commander Brel led them toward human space, his heart heavy with doubt. When they crossed the border, they were immediately surrounded by human vessels. Sleek, black ships that moved with terrifying speed and precision. Brel ordered his fleet to hold position and broadcast their peaceful intentions on all channels. A response came within minutes. "This is Captain Minho Choi of the Earth Federation flagship Sovereign. You have 1 hour to state your purpose. Any hostile action will result in your immediate destruction." Brel swallowed his pride. "We come seeking peace. We wish to negotiate an end to hostilities." There was a long pause. "Then you may approach. 1 ship only. The rest stay here." Brel transferred to a shuttle and flew toward the human fleet alone. As he passed through their formation, he felt his confidence crumbling. The ships around him were enormous, bristling with weapons he could not identify. Their hulls were covered in strange symbols and designs that seemed to pulse with inner light. He landed in the Sovereign's docking bay and was immediately surrounded by human soldiers. They were silent and expressionless, their armor black as the void between stars. They led him through corridors that hummed with power, past doors that opened without sound, into the depths of a ship that felt more like a living creature than a machine. Finally, he was brought to a large chamber. At the far end stood a man in a simple uniform. Admiral Jinho Park? Brel had studied the man's file extensively. A career soldier, a tactical genius, and, according to recent intelligence, the architect of humanity's war machine, Commander Brel Jinho said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. Welcome to the Sovereign. I understand you have an offer from the Council. Brel straightened his posture and began his prepared speech. Admiral, the Galactic Council recognizes that mistakes were made. We are prepared to offer full voting rights to humanity, immediate lifting of all technology restrictions, and substantial reparations for the difficulties you have faced. He paused, hoping to see some reaction. In exchange, we ask only that you rejoin the galactic community in peace. Ginho listened without expression. When Brel finished, the Admiral was silent for a long moment. You offer us now, he said slowly, what you should have given us freely 120 years ago. Yes, Brel admitted. We were wrong. We admit it. You offer it now because you are afraid. Brel did not deny it. Yes, we have seen your fleet. We know we cannot match it. Ginho walked to a window and looked out at the stars. His reflection showed a face carved from stone, eyes that held a century of accumulated anger. For generations, my people came to your council with open hands. We asked for nothing but fairness. We were laughed at, mocked, told we were too primitive, too dangerous, too violent. He turned to face Brel. Do you know what it feels like to watch your people be humiliated again and again? To see your children grow up knowing they will never be accepted? Brel had no answer. Jinho reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip. He held it out to Brel. Take this to your council. Play it before the full assembly. This is our answer. Brel took the chip with trembling hands. Is there no chance for peace? There might have been, Ginho said quietly. A year ago, a decade ago, a century ago. But you waited too long. Your fear comes too late. Brel was escorted back to his shuttle and returned to his waiting fleet. They made the journey back to Seraph Prime in complete silence. The council assembled within hours. Every representative, every advisor, every observer who could fit in the great chamber was present. Brel walked to the central podium and inserted the data chip. The massive display above the chamber flickered to life. President Hannah Yoon appeared on the screen. She was sitting in a simple chair, wearing plain clothes. There was no ceremony, no grandeur. Just a woman speaking directly to the beings who had oppressed her people. For 120 years, she began, humanity was part of your council. We followed your rules. We obeyed your restrictions. We accepted every insult, every rejection, every act of discrimination, because we believed that patience would eventually be rewarded. Her eyes hardened. We were wrong. Patience earned us nothing but contempt. Every time we proved ourselves worthy, you raised the standards. Every time we met your demands, you invented new ones. You never intended to accept us. You simply enjoyed watching us try. She leaned forward slightly. That ends now. The United Earth Federation formally declares war on the Galactic Council and all its member species. We do not seek negotiation. We do not want your apologies. We do not need your permission. We are taking what should have been given freely. Surrender is your only option. Resistance will be met with total annihilation. The screen went dark. The chamber was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what they had just heard pressed down on every being in the room. High Counselor Velen finally found his voice. They cannot be serious. No species would declare war on the entire galaxy. They would be destroyed. Elder Yura shook her head slowly. You still do not understand. You have never understood. Humans do not care about odds. They do not care about logic. They care about justice, about honor, about pride. She looked around the chamber at the terrified faces. You created this. All of you. Every joke, every insult, every denied petition. You planted the seeds of this war with your own hands. Ambassador Turek was pale. His earlier confidence completely gone. What do we do? Commander Brell stood up. His face was grim, but determined. We fight. What other choice do we have? Across the galaxy, in the command center of the Sovereign, Admiral Jinho Park received word that the message had been delivered. He nodded once and turned to his officers. Begin the operation, he said. All fleets advance. Today, humanity stops asking. Today we start taking. Captain Minho Choi relayed the orders. Throughout human space, thousands of ships began to move. The largest military force ever assembled by any species, oriented toward a single goal. The war had begun. The galaxy burned. Admiral Ginho Park had spent 30 years studying the Council's defenses. He knew every patrol route, every strategic position, every assumption they had made about warfare. He had designed his attack to exploit all of it. 17 fleets struck 17 targets simultaneously. There was no warning. One moment the stars were quiet. The next, human ships appeared from nowhere, weapons already firing. Defense stations that were supposed to protect entire systems were destroyed in minutes. Communication networks were jammed. Reinforcement routes were blocked. The Mordani Empire was the first to fall. Ambassador Torek had fled to his homeworld, hoping to organize resistance. He stood on the balcony of his palace and watched the sky fill with human vessels. They darkened the sun like a metal eclipse. Their weapons glowed with blue fire. This cannot be happening, he whispered. This is impossible. But it was happening, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. General Taiho Kim led the ground invasion personally. His soldiers descended from the sky in drop pods that fell like rain. They landed in the capital city and began advancing through the streets. The Mordani defenders fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. Taiho walked through the conquered palace 3 days later. Mordani civilians cowered in the corners. Soldiers lay dead in the hallways. Ambassador Torek knelt before him, chains around his wrists. Why? Torek asked. His voice was broken. We offered you everything. We were willing to give you what you wanted. Ho looked down at him with cold eyes. You offered it because you were scared. Not because you believed we deserved it. Now he gestured to his soldiers. Take him away. He will stand trial for his crimes against humanity. The Mordani homeworld surrendered unconditionally that evening. Every other Mordani colony followed within a week. General Keth of the Helix Collective refused to surrender. He was a warrior. His ancestors had been warriors. He would rather die than submit to a species. His people had always considered inferior. He gathered every ship his collective could spare. Over 2,000 vessels, the largest fleet his species had ever assembled. They met Captain Minho Choi's battle group in the Varus Nebula. The battle lasted for hours. Keth had expected a fight. He had expected losses. He had not expected what actually happened. Human weapons were beyond anything in the collective's arsenal. Energy beams that cut through shields like paper. Missiles that changed course mid-flight to follow their targets. Ships that moved so fast they seemed to teleport from place to place. Min commanded the battle from the bridge of the Sovereign. His voice was calm as he issued orders. Group 7, flank left. Group 12, target their command ship. All batteries fire at will. The collective's fleet crumbled piece by piece. Ships exploded in silent flashes of light. Escape pods were launched and ignored. The humans were not interested in prisoners. They were interested in victory. Keth's flagship was disabled 3 hours into the battle. He was captured alive and brought before Admiral Park aboard the Sovereign. His armor was scorched. His face was covered in blue blood from a wound on his forehead. You fought well, Jinho said. Your people have honor. Keth spat on the floor. I do not need compliments from you. No, but you need to make a choice. Surrender your worlds. Order your remaining forces to stand down. If you do this, your people will be treated fairly. If you do not, I will burn every colony, every station, every ship, until there is nothing left of the Helix Collective but ash and memory." Keth stared at him for a long moment. He saw no mercy in those human eyes, no doubt. Only absolute certainty. "You would really do it," Keth said slowly. "You would destroy us all." "Yes." Keth closed his eyes. He thought of his children, his grandchildren, the future generations who would never exist if he chose pride over survival. "I surrender," he said quietly. "May my ancestors forgive me." The Helix Collective fell without another shot being fired. "High Counselor." Velen watched the war reports with growing despair. The Mordani Empire conquered in a week. The Helix Collective defeated in a single battle. A dozen smaller species had already surrendered without fighting at all. He turned to Commander Brel. "We must make our stand. If Seraph Prime falls, the Council is finished." Brel nodded grimly. "I have assembled every ship we have left. 3,000 vessels from 18 different species. It is the largest fleet in galactic history. Will it be enough?" Brill was silent for a moment. "I do not know." The combined fleet of the Galactic Council gathered around Seraph Prime. They formed defensive lines, activated their shields, and waited. Brel stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars for any sign of the enemy. They did not have to wait long. The human fleet appeared like a wave of darkness. Thousands of ships arranged in perfect formation. At their center was the Sovereign. It's larger and more terrifying than anything Brel had ever seen. Dr. Sora. Beak's voice crackled through the human fleet's communication network. "Quantum disruption field, ready for deployment." Admiral Jinho Park's voice replied, "Activate." Something happened that Brel could not understand. One moment his ships were preparing to fight. The next, every system connected to faster-than-light travel went offline. Navigation computers crashed. Emergency jump protocols failed. They were trapped. The entire Council fleet stuck in normal space with nowhere to run. "What have they done?" Brel whispered. His first officer checked the readings with shaking hands. "Some kind of field, sir. We cannot escape. None of us can." The human fleet began to advance. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Council ships tried to fight back, but their weapons were useless against human shields. They tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. One by one, the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever assembled was torn apart. Brel watched his ships die around him. Vessels that had served the Council for centuries. Crewed by beings who had sworn to protect galactic peace. Reduced to burning wreckage in minutes, when only his flagship remained. He opened a channel to the Sovereign. "Admiral Park," he said, "I surrender. Please, stop the killing." Ginho's voice came back, calm and emotionless. "Your surrender is accepted. Order any remaining forces in the galaxy to stand down. The war is over." Brel slumped in his chair. Around him, his crew was silent. Some were crying, some were praying. Most just stared at nothing, trying to comprehend what had happened. In the span of 3 months, humanity had done what no other species in history had ever accomplished. They had conquered the galaxy. On Seraph Prime, High Counselor Velen was escorted from his chambers by human soldiers. He walked through the halls of the Great Council building, past the empty seats where representatives had once debated the fate of civilizations. Lieutenant Narration met him at the entrance. She was the same woman who had stood before this council a year ago, asking for equality. Now she stood as a conqueror. "Where are you taking me?" Velen asked. To Earth, Nari replied, "You will answer for what your council did to my people." Velen looked back at the building that had been the center of galactic power for thousands of years. "We never thought it would come to this. We never imagined." "That is exactly the problem," Nari said. "You never imagined we were capable of this. You saw us as children, as animals, as lesser beings. You never stopped to consider that we might grow up." She gestured to the soldiers. "Take him." As Velen was led away, He asked one final question. What happens now? What will humans do with the galaxy? Nari watched him go without answering. She did not know what the future held. None of them did. Humanity had won a war that should have been impossible. They had proven themselves to the galaxy, but at what cost? And what came next? Those were questions that would have to wait. For now, there was only the aftermath of the storm. And the long, difficult work of building something new from the ashes of the old. 3 years had passed since the war ended. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Council no longer existed. In its place stood the Terran hegemony, a new government that spanned every inhabited star system. President Hannah Yoon had been elected as Supreme Chancellor by unanimous vote. There had been no other candidates. There had been no need for any. Hannah sat in her office on Earth, reviewing reports from across the galaxy. The work of rebuilding was slow and difficult. Entire worlds needed reconstruction. Millions of beings who had lost everything in the war required aid. Old hatreds between species still simmered beneath the surface, but progress was being made. Slowly, steadily, progress was being made. Admiral. Ginho Park requested entry. She granted it, and he walked in, looking older than he had 3 years ago. The war had taken something from him. She could see it in his eyes. The memorial is ready, he said. The ceremony begins in 1 hour. Hannah nodded and stood up. Walk with me. They walked together through the corridors of the government building. Human and alien officials passed them, nodding respectfully. 3 years ago, no alien would have willingly worked alongside a human. Now they had no choice. But Hannah noticed that some of them were beginning to do so willingly. That was the first step toward something real. Do you ever regret it? She asked Jinho quietly. He was silent for a long moment. I regret the deaths. Human and alien alike. I regret that we had to become warriors when we only wanted to be equals. He paused. But I do not regret winning. I cannot regret giving my people freedom. Hannah understood. She felt the same way. The weight of what they had done would never fully leave them, but neither would the knowledge that they had no other choice. General Taiho Kim governed the former Mordani, territories from a palace that had once belonged to Ambassador Tarek. He had transformed the occupation into something unexpected. Instead of crushing the Mordani, he was rebuilding them. New schools taught human and Mordani children side by side. Factories that once built weapons now produced food and medicine. The chains of conquest were slowly being replaced by the bonds of cooperation. Torek had been tried and sentenced to labor, not death. Taiho visited him occasionally in the work camps. The former ambassador was older now, broken in spirit, but not in body. I still do not understand, Torek said during one visit. You conquered us. You could have destroyed us. Why are you helping us instead? Taiho looked out at the fields where Mordani workers tended crops that would feed their own people. Because destruction is easy. Building is hard. My people spent a century being denied the chance to build anything. Now that we have the power, we choose to build rather than destroy. You are fools, Torek said bitterly. We would not have done the same for you. I know, Taiho replied. That is why we won. And that is why we will succeed where you failed. Dr. Sorabik had established the new Galactic Science Academy on a neutral world between Earth and the former Council territories. Scientists from every species were invited to study and research together. The technologies that had once been hoarded by the powerful were now available to all. She stood in her laboratory, surrounded by students from a dozen different worlds. They were working on a project to improve food production on desert planets. It was small work compared to the weapons she had built during the war, but it felt more important. A young Mordani student approached her with a question. He was nervous, still uncertain how to interact with humans. Sora smiled at him warmly and spent an hour explaining the answer. When he left, he was smiling too. One mind at a time, Sora thought. One heart at a time. That is how we heal. Elder Yera had been appointed as an advisor to the hegemony. She was one of the few aliens who had shown humanity respect before the war. Chancellor Yoon valued her wisdom and her perspective. They met in the Chancellor's private garden, surrounded by flowers from 100 different worlds. Yura had a question that had been troubling her for years. Was this always your plan? She asked. From the very beginning? When you withdrew from the council, did you already know you would declare war? Hannah considered the question carefully. We hoped it would not come to that. We hoped that our absence would make the council reconsider. We hoped that fear of what we might become would be enough to change their minds. She shook her head. But we prepared for war because we knew hope was not enough. And if the council had offered equality before you were ready to fight, then we would have accepted, Hannah said simply. We never wanted war, Elder. We wanted to be treated as equals. But when they denied us that, they left us with only two choices. Accept subjugation forever, or fight for our freedom. And now? Yura asked. What does humanity want now? Hannah looked up at the sky, where ships from dozens of species crossed paths in peaceful commerce. We want what we have always wanted. A galaxy where all beings are treated fairly, where strength is not used to oppress the weak, where children grow up knowing they will be judged by their actions, not their species. She turned to Yura. We did not conquer the galaxy to rule it. We conquered it to change it. Captain Minho Choi, now promoted to admiral, commanded the patrol fleets that protected the new borders. His job was no longer to conquer. It was to defend. He trained a new generation of officers, human and alien alike. They learned to fight together, to trust each other, to see beyond the divisions that had once separated their peoples. It was difficult work. Old prejudices died slowly, but every year, the crews became more integrated. Every year, the trust grew stronger. Minho believed that eventually, the divisions would fade entirely. It might take a century. It might take longer, but it would happen. He stood on the bridge of his new flagship and looked out at the stars. They were the same stars his ancestors had dreamed about thousands of years ago. Now they belonged to humanity, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Lieutenant Narration had returned to Earth after the war. Her role in the intelligence operations was classified at the highest level. No one would ever know the things she had done. She walked through the streets of Seoul, watching children play in a park. They were laughing, running, completely unaware of the sacrifices that had been made for their freedom. That was how it should be. Children should not carry the weight of war. An old man sat on a bench nearby. He recognized Nari and nodded to her. He was a veteran of the war, one of the few soldiers who knew her true role. Do you think they will remember? He asked. The next generation? Will they understand what we did for them? Nari sat down beside him. I hope not. I hope they grow up in a galaxy where war is just a story in history books. I hope they never have to face what we faced. The old man smiled sadly. Then we did our job. Yes, Nari agreed. We did. The memorial ceremony took place on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Thousands of people gathered, human and alien alike. They stood in silence as the names of the fallen were read aloud. Human names. Mordani names. Helix names. All of them carved into a wall of white stone that stretched 4 kilometers. Enemies who had become casualties of a war that never should have happened. Admiral Jinho Park stood before the crowd. He was not wearing his uniform. He was dressed simply like any other citizen. Today, he was not a conqueror. He was a mourner. We did not want this, he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. We did not dream of empire or glory. We dreamed of acceptance, of equality, of a place among the stars where we would be judged by our hearts, not our origins. He paused. Looking at the names carved in stone, the beings whose names are written here died because that dream was denied. They died because hatred was easier than understanding. They died because fear was stronger than compassion. He placed his hand on the cold stone wall. We cannot bring them back. We cannot undo what was done. But we can honor their sacrifice by building the galaxy they deserved. A galaxy where no species is treated as lesser, where no child grows up believing they are worthless, where no people have to fight for the basic dignity that should be given freely. He stepped back and looked at the crowd. Human and alien faces looked back at him, united in grief. "Let this wall stand forever," he said. "Let it remind us of what hatred costs, and let it inspire us to be better than those who came before." The sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving flowers and memories at the base of the wall. Chancellor Hannah Yoon remained after everyone else had gone. She stood alone before the memorial, reading the names of beings she had never met but would never forget. High Counselor Velen was brought to her under guard. He had been a prisoner for 3 years, waiting to learn his fate. He expected execution or permanent imprisonment. Instead, Hannah offered him a chair. "You called us children once," she said. "You were right. We were young. We made mistakes. We trusted beings who did not deserve our trust." Velen sat down slowly, confused. "But children grow up," Hannah continued. "And when they do, they remember who hurt them and who helped them." She extended her hand toward him. "The old galaxy is dead. We cannot change what happened, but we can choose what happens next." Her eyes met his. "Help us build something better. Not for your sake or for mine, but for the children who will inherit what we create." Velen stared at her hand for a long moment. He thought of everything he had done, everything he had believed, everything that had led to this moment. He thought of the names on the wall behind him. Slowly, hesitantly, he took her hand. It was not forgiveness. It was too soon for that. But it was a beginning above them. The stars began to appear one by one, filling the darkening sky with light. The same stars that had watched over 100 wars, 1,000 empires, 1,000,000 acts of cruelty and kindness. Humanity had claimed its place among them, not as servants, not as conquerors, but as equals at last. And somewhere in the vastness of space, aboard a ship that sailed between worlds, a child looked out at the stars and dreamed of the future. A future where all beings could stand together. A future worth fighting for. A future that was finally, after all these years, within reach.